Welcome to our reflections on the book of Revelation. We are now in chapter 18, and I want to begin at verse 7, which is the introduction to the sudden collapse of the whole empire of the Antichrist. Up to this moment, it looked as if it was completely secure and nothing could touch it. I mean, who can compare with the beast? Was the war cry we found in chapter 13. And yet we'll see that as soon as God decrees from heaven that it's to go, it goes, and that's it. So I want to read from verse 7 for you. Well, I'll start at verse 6. She must be paid double the amount she exacted. She is to have a doubly strong cup of her own mixture. Who likes a taste of their own medicine? Every one of her shows and orgies is to be matched by a torture and a grief. I am the queen on my throne, she says to herself, and I am no widow, and shall never be in mourning. And for that, within a single day, the plagues will fall upon her. Disease and mourning and famine. She will be burnt right up, and the Lord God has condemned her, and he has great power. So this is what we are moving into. But before I even say anything about it, I want to remind you that the 7 plagues of chapter 16 is the collapse of this city. All we're looking at now is looking back at this collapse. But the collapse was then, as I told you, that the Lord pulled the rug from under them and literally dismantled their system. Okay. As we have just heard, this empire behaved as if it was God. Who can compare with the beast? And the emperor or the leader, the Antichrist, had blasphemous titles claiming to be God. So she thinks she's God, and yet there's no justice, no wisdom, no truth, no integrity, no love. How can they be God unless they're God of the underworld, where only pride and arrogance and injustice and oppression of the poor actually exist? So what we're going to see now is that the language that Ezekiel used in chapter 27 shows the sins of Tyre in its fall. And Isaiah 47 verses 1 to 15 speaks of the fall of Babylon at the time of Nebuchadnezzar. And John uses the language of both of these prophets to describe the fall of Babylon. He doesn't need new words. The words have already been given. So why reinvent the wheel? What we have to look at is the fact that this city, and I remember I told you before, the city is the entire empire. This empire had an advanced culture and was developed more than the rest of the world. So she must bear responsibility for all that she has done to the rest of the world. And we are told that she lived in wanton luxury, that she suffered from self-glorification and pride in her own achievements. So I want to remind you of Luke chapter 12, verses 16 to 21, in which Jesus told the story of the foolish farmer who made himself more and more and more rich, and he gathered all his goods in his barns and all the rest of it. And then finally God said to him, "You're a fool. This very night I'm going to demand your soul. So what are you going to do with all this stuff?" And this is what you're looking at here in the fall of Babylon as well. With all their accumulation of wealth and everything, it's all going to die a sudden death. So what's the point of it? And this is why the whole thing is given to us in detail, so that we will look and not go down the route that the evil empire goes. So if you're talking about the sudden death of a city, we've had experience of that in the 20th century. We saw the sudden death of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for example. In seconds, it wasn't an hour. In seconds, the whole city is wiped out by an atomic bomb. So if you're looking at the 21st century, then you're looking at the ability of the 21st century to destroy as well. If you happen to be in the city at the time of this sudden death, it's actually too late. Jesus warned the people of Israel about the coming judgment that was coming to Jerusalem after his death. And this is what he said in Luke 21 from verses 20 to 23. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, that's the armies of Titus in 70 AD, you must realize that she will soon be laid desolate. Then those in Judea, that's the surrounding area of Jerusalem, must escape to the mountains. Those inside the city must leave it, otherwise they'll all be killed. And those in the country districts must not take refuge in it. For this is the time of vengeance, when all that Scripture says must be fulfilled. So if you wait until the siege of Jerusalem has already started, you're going down with the city. What we do know is that the Christians, the believers in Jesus, actually obeyed him and left the city of Jerusalem ahead of time. They went to Pella in the desert. Okay. And then we're told that this city is going to burn to the ground. Now, we know that holy things should be burnt to the ground, and the holy city of Jerusalem was burnt to the ground. And this whole empire of Antichrist, which is not holy, it's absolutely unholy, but it's going to be burnt in the other sense that it will be reduced to ashes. It has no value. There will be nothing left over. There won't be a memory of it even. And so we are looking at the fact that God is saying to us, are you sure you have made the right decision about whether you want to be in the empire of the Antichrist or whether you want to be in the kingdom of God? That's behind all of this. John wouldn't give you all this detail if he wasn't trying to absolutely push you to make the right decision. Okay. The rest of chapter 18 is divided into two parts. From verse 9 to 19, we have the mourning of the earth for the economic collapse that is happening. And from verse 20 to 24, we have the rejoicing in heaven. Okay, so let's look at the mourning for the economic collapse. And John gives us this in absolute detail, using again the language of the prophets in order to put it across to us. We have seen the fall of Babylon is the judgment of God on the Antichrist system, okay? And since God is omnipotent, nobody can reverse his judgment. As I've said before, in God's court, there's no appeal. All you can do is look on in awe. So the first thing you come across here, I'll read it for you, is the 10 kings, the 10 horns of the Antichrist are absolutely helpless. They can do nothing. This is verse 9. There will be mourning and weeping for her by the kings of the earth, who fornicated with her and lived with her in luxury. They see the smoke as she burns, and they keep at a safe distance from fear of her agony. And they will say, mourn, mourn. Some translations will say, woe, woe, for this great city, for Babylon, so powerful a city, doomed within a single hour. Now, why would the kings of the earth be the first ones to mourn? I've already told you, and John has told us earlier, that they only have power for a single hour. They get their power from the Antichrist. And if the Antichrist falls, they fall. If the Antichrist system falls, they fall. So they're number one on the mourning list because they lose all power. Their power base is completely gone. Okay. Now, John is using the language of Ezekiel chapters 27 and 28 for the fall of the city of Tyre, which I'm not going to read for you. There isn't time. In other words, what you're going to see here is those who mourn the death of this system are those who benefited the most from it. There will not be any sign of ordinary people, poor people, little people. They're not mentioned at all. Not at all. This is the great and the powerful mourning the loss of their greatness and their power. And so John wants you to see that the mourning that is here from the people who were in league with the Antichrist is completely selfish. They're not actually mourning the loss of life in the whole Antichrist system. They're not mourning the loss of millions of dead. No, they're only mourning the loss of their own benefits and their own economic power. So they're mourning the loss of their own wealth and power. That's completely selfish. So these are the 10 horns of the beast, and they're very much affected by this judgment. So you'll notice that in judging this system, God doesn't even have to mention the 10 horns of the beast. He doesn't have to. It's not necessary. God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. These are nothings. And it's only now with the judgment of Babylon that these 10 horns realize that they're absolute nothingness. And you're told in verse 9 that they stand helplessly there, just looking on. They can do nothing, but they're in great fear of what they see. Because if this is what's happening to the city, it's happening to them as well. Okay. So it's those who have vested interest in this system who are the ones who mourn. Now, at the time John is writing, Rome's luxury was proverbial, as I told you before. The Talmud says that God gave 10 cabs of wealth to the world, and Rome took 9 of them and left the rest of the world denuded. That's a bit like the billionaire problem we have today, which I will mention again. So what strikes the 10 horns, these kings, is the suddenness and the completeness of the destruction. The whole thing collapses like a deck of cards. But they should remember Sodom and Gomorrah. Its destruction was sudden and complete as well. And Jesus has told us in the Gospels, and John has told us, and Jesus has told us in the book of Revelation as well, he's coming like a thief in the night. Judgment will come to the earth suddenly and unexpectedly. That's why we have to be ready. If we think we're going to notice the signs, we won't. This is sudden and complete. These kings who are mourning the death of Babylon don't care one iota about the people who are suffering. They only care about themselves, and they only care about what is happening to them. John shows clearly that nobody goes to the rescue of the people in this system. Nobody. And so all the poor people who have been duped into worshipping the beast, there they are, helplessly left to face the terrifying judgment of God. So I want to show you what exactly they are mourning, because the second group who mourn are the traders of the earth. And this is what John says from verse 11. There will be weeping and distress over her among all the traders of the earth, the second group that's mentioned, because there's nobody to buy their cargoes of goods, their stocks of gold and silver and jewels and pearls, linen and purple and silks and scarlet. Notice the necessities of life are not mentioned. All the sandalwood and every piece of ivory or fine wood or in bronze or iron or marble, the cinnamon and the spices, the myrrh and the ointment and the incense, the wine, the oil, the flour and the corn, their stocks of cattle and sheep and horses and chariots, their slaves, their human cargo. John actually says those words, their slaves, comma, their human cargo. Wow. And what you have here is a list of luxurious goods. You're not dealing with ordinary people, and they don't care about the ordinary people. You're only dealing with the rich and those who are living in absolute luxury. So the human trafficking was very much part of the problem in the Roman Empire, because we know that the city of Rome, for example, had approximately 1/3 citizens and 2/3 slaves, where the citizens had absolutely everything done for them. They didn't even have to tie their own sandals. So the list of goods here actually represents the luxury of Rome, and the luxury of Rome was proverbial at the time. But if you translate that into the 8th empire that we belong to, that's the 21st century, we have exactly the same problem. Exactly the same problem. So we don't have to worry about Rome in the 1st century. They've been dealt with. We have to worry about us. We, as a world, have turned into an economy. We are no longer nations with beautiful cultures and wonderful traditions. We're all a big, wide economy, and they want it to become a world economy, and they don't want any nation to be any better than anybody else, because the wealth of the world is in the hands of very, very few, which are a group of billionaires, and they just do what they like. But luxurious food comes to us from all over the world, just like the merchant and the seafarers. Luxurious goods and artworks can be found if you have the money. There's child trafficking today, human trafficking, and child abuse, and all the sexual pursuits of human trafficking. There are slaves too, but we don't call them slaves anymore. We simply call them migrants. In other words, we're trying to put a fancy name on those that we put doing the most menial work. So John actually saw that the final empire, the one we're living in, would in fact be very luxurious. Okay, so what they had done was they had tried to make utopia on the earth. They had tried to turn the earth into a paradise without God. And their idea of paradise was that you would have all the luxury goods you want, you would have all the leisure you want, that other human beings would be sacrificed to be your servants and your slaves. While you had all the money and all the privileges, and your servant and your slave had none of the privileges and none of the benefits, none whatsoever. So you were living like a royal person at the expense of other people's lives. So the sheer injustice of the system is very, very clear. And John says that this system has to be dealt with literally in one blow. I want to give you the most wonderful meditation on this system that you can possibly find. I absolutely love this. This is Psalm 49. And it's very much in the vein of what we're actually looking at here. This was written by one of the sons of Korah. Hear this, all you nations. Pay attention, all who live on the earth. Important people, ordinary people, rich and poor alike. My lips have wisdom to utter. My heart whispers sound sense. I turn my attention to a proverb and set my solution to the harp. Why should I be afraid in evil times? When malice dogs my steps and hems me in, why should I be afraid of men who trust in their wealth and boast of the profusion of their riches? Man cannot redeem himself. No man can pay his own ransom to God. It costs too much to redeem a life. It's beyond him, and he couldn't live forever. He will never see the pit. When all the time he sees that wise men die and the foolish and the stupid perish both together, and they leave their fortunes to others. Their tombs are their eternal home, their lasting residence, though they called estates by their name. Man, when he prospers, forfeits intelligence. He's like the cattle that are doomed for slaughter. And on they go with their self-assurance, with men running after them as soon as they raise their voice. But like sheep, they are herded into Sheol. Death will herd them to pasture, and the upright will have the better of them. Dawn will come, and the show that they made will disappear. Sheol will be their home for them, but God will redeem my life from the grasp of Sheol. So do not be afraid of a man when he goes rich, when the glory of his house increases. When he dies, he will take nothing with him. His glory cannot follow him below. I didn't finish the psalm, you can finish it yourself. And what the psalmist is saying is, if you want your heaven on earth, you've made the wrong choice. Because when the time comes for you to leave the earth, you cannot take the cattle and the sheep and all the luxuries that we have actually described here. You cannot take your house, you cannot take your car, you cannot even take your mobile phone. You can take nothing except faith hope, and love. That's the only baggage that is allowed. And the baggage that is extremely important when you take your final flight from this earth, that baggage is love. Because St. Paul says, in the end, there is faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Thank you for listening. Slán agus Banach Dé live. Goodbye. God bless you.
Are you searching for answers? Discover your true identity. Stay tuned to Shalom World.